Hello everyone, GoldenNova here. The final attribute of the latest legendary duelist cycle is almost upon us, promising updates for 3 archetypes that revolve around the light attribute. Kaiba's XYZ Light Union monsters just got a big facelift, but we've actually already done an episode on those, while the Tachyon cards will be getting added to the eventual Galaxy Eyes video. But that does leave us with one theme that's been waiting in the wings, and now it's time for them to take the stage. Premiering in the August 2017 core set, Code of the Duelist, Trickstars are the first theme piloted by Vrain's protagonist Sky Zaizen under the guise of Blue Angel, an online idol with a lot to prove. These cards hit the scene at the beginning of the Link era, and kind of like how Runix rocked the boat by using a win condition that wasn't the traditional battle damage, Trickstars did something similar with burn damage. These iconic idols would avoid as much interaction as possible, setting up scenarios that would not only tax the opponent into oblivion, but even take their entire hand away, leaving them with no options to fight back. But they didn't really need those hands anyway. Why play cards when they could be using them to clap on and cheer for their favorite fairies? So get ready to break out the track list, pump up the jam, and cheer at the top of your lungs, cause it's time for Trickstar Explained. Today's episode is brought to you by my lovely patrons, as well as the wonderful people over at Dragon Shield. Get the sleeves as strong as dragon scales and save 5% on your order by using coupon code GoldenNova at checkout. So what's the deal with Trickstars? Well, they're a series of light attribute fairy type monsters that have a knack for link summoning, but also added in a little bit of fusion flavor down the line, cause I guess they're quirky like that. They're primarily defined by their ability to deal burn damage, an effect that you'll see on basically every other card in the theme. So you have a lot of incentives to sit behind a lot of stall cards and let your performance do all the work. And who said actions speak louder than words? First up is Trickstar Nightshade, a level 1 monster with 100 attack and 0 defense. And if this card is sent to the grave as link material for the link summon of a Trickstar monster, you can special summon this card, but banish it when it leaves the field. That makes Nightshade a really strong link climbing tool. It basically accomplishes the same thing as Prank Kid's Meow Meow Moo, as you can turn this into a Link 1, revive this, then make a Link 2 off of those monsters. And heaven forbid the Link 1 gets you some value on the way up that ladder. Which is certainly good news for Nightshade, cause this certainly helped them climb the popularity rankings as well. Trickstar Hoodie is a level 2 monster with 600 attack and 1800 defense, and if you control a Trickstar Fusion or Link monster, you can special summon this card from your hand. And if this card is sent to the grave as material for the Link summon of a Trickstar monster, you can add a Trickstar Fusion or Trickstar Diffusion from your deck to your hand, both of which are very powerful enablers for the fusion half of our strategy. Now, it seems unlikely that you're going to be getting the free summon off of having a fusion monster if you're using this to search out the cards that get you into fusions, but since you can also summon this off of having a link monster, it'll be pretty easy to plop this onto the board. And once you make a link out of it, the fusion gates swing wide open. It may be one of our newer cards, but it's so good that it's already become a certified hoodie classic. Trickstar Lilybell is a level 2 monster with 800 attack and 2000 defense, and if this card is added from your deck to your hand, except by drawing it, you can special summon it from your hand. It can attack directly, and when this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent, you can target a Trickstar monster in your grave and add it to your hand. This is one of our premier search targets, not just because it was doing the Poplar thing years beforehand, but because it's a great resource engine. A Link deck being able to recover its cards out of the graveyard means you're never without your Link material for long, and once you've done that, you can link away the Lilybell so your opponent doesn't get a free way to punk you for a bunch of damage on the crackback. Dealing a bunch of damage is, of course, our job. It may not seem very threatening, but that bell has seen some things. And by things, I mean shins, and by seen, I mean broken. Trickstar Mandrake is a level 2 monster with 0 attack and 1000 defense, and if this card is sent from the hand to the grave, you can special summon it in defense position, but is banished if it leaves the field. And if this card is sent to the grave as link material for the link summon of a Trickstar monster, you can target a monster an opponent's link monster points to, and destroy it. This card has some odd utility. The two effects don't really interact with each other at all, because if you summon it via its effect, it'll get banished, so you don't really get the pop. And even if you do pull it off, if your opponent isn't on a link monster, then you're not really doing anything. This was very clearly built during the pre-revision Master Rule 4 era, which means it isn't really doing anything now. But despite that, Mandrake should be thankful it's not getting dissed as hard as Drake is right now. Trickstar Lycoris is a level 3 monster with 1600 attack and 1200 defense, and as a quick effect, you can reveal this card in your hand, then target a Trickstar monster you control, except a copy of this card, and special summon this card, and if you do, return that monster that you targeted to the hand. Each time any number of cards are added to your opponent's hand, you burn your opponent for 200 damage for each. You are looking at probably the most heinous monster in the whole theme, full stop. Games have been won and lost by this card sitting around and draining your opponent out for doing nothing. Hands that were unplayable became unlocked by you bouncing back one of your searchers for another run at your deck, and all of that on a decently sized 1600 attack monster that can randomly get in for an extra attack when the shields are down to win the game. This card is a menace from top to bottom. You can even target the same monster with multiple Lycorises on the same chain to get more than one out of your hand at a time, and if you thought the 200 damage per card was bad, buddy, you ain't see what happens when they double that, or when the field spell gets involved, or when the Link monsters get involved. Ignore the cute facade. This is an instigator of Satan's own musical review, the Lie Chorus. Trickstar Aqua Angel is a level 4 water monster with 0 attack and defense that's also treated as a Marincess. Oh, now that makes sense. How did they manage to sneak into a second attributed Duelist Pack? Link monsters that point to this card can't be destroyed by battle, and if you control a Trickstar or Marincess monster, you can special summon this card from your hand or grave. And if this card is sent to the grave as Link material, you can look at your opponent's hand and all face down cards they control. Huh? I mean, those last two effects are only once per duel, but huh? This card is outrageous. It fulfills the role of being more free Link material for 2 decks that can't get enough of it, and now provides you with perfect knowledge of your opponent's hidden cards. And that can apply to any Link summon, just so you know, not just Marincess or Trickstars. This was one of the new reveals, and I am sure this card is going to cause some big problems down the line, mark my words. Is every monster we talk about here just going to be a war criminal? Trickstar Candina is a level 4 monster with 1800 attack and 400 defense, and when this card is normal summoned, you can add a Trickstar card from your deck to your hand. And each time your opponent activates a spell or trap card, burn them for 200 immediately after it resolves. Oh yeah, actually they are all going to be war criminals. Great. This grabs any card on the theme, so it's always going to be relevant and punishes your opponent for playing 2/3 of the card pool. This is also one of the best combos with Lycoris, since you can just search the Lycoris off of this, pop this back in your hand to summon it out, then get another search next turn by normal summoning Candina. Or search out Lilybell. It'll get special summoned by its own effect, and if it gets in for damage, you can grab more cards out of your graveyard, maybe even a Lycoris. And heaven help you if they find a way to get multiple normal summons in one turn, because none of this is once per turn, and they are not taking their foot off the gas. With this card, it's never a question of if it can Dina hurt you, it's how much. Trickstar Narcissus is a level 4 monster with 1000 attack and 1800 defense, and if your opponent takes effect damage except during the damage step, you can special summon this card from your hand. And each time your opponent activates a monster effect in the hand or grave, burn them for 200 damage immediately after it resolves. Oh, so it's summoning effect combos with the theme's basic premise. Cool. The downside though is that this burn triggers on actions that are a bit less repeatable. You can punish hand traps or floating effects, but Maxi is a problem because it counts summons, not Ash Blossoms. This is one of the lesser hooligans that populates the theme, but as a level 4 monster with a special summon effect, you'd best keep your eye out, because you never know what plan of action they can take that'll make you Narcissus your game plan goodbye. Trickstar Rodode is a level 4 monster with 1400 attack and 1900 defense, and you can discard a Trickstar card to target a Trickstar Link monster in your grave and special summon it. And each time any number of cards are banished from your opponent's graveyard, immediately burn them for 200 damage for each card banished. Another burn effect that isn't quite as dangerous as our more prevalent ones, though be careful when they start breaking out the soul releases. The big draw is the Link Revival effect, as you get it back with really no negation or strings attached. From there, you can utilize their effect to amp up the damage, or link them up into something bigger. It's a real haymaker of a card that'll make your opponent hit the road, oh Jack. Our next card is a strange one, but due to the anime, I feel like we've got to give this a spot in the video. Dark Angel is a level 5 dark monster with 0 attack and defense, and when your fairy monster is targeted for an attack, you can tribute it and send this card from your hand to the grave. Then target a face-up monster you control to change the attack target of your targeted monster. And if you do, it gains attack equal to the original attack of the attributed monster until the end of this turn. So, it's a hand trap that sacrifices the monster being attacked to add that power to another monster. You don't protect the monster under threat, it just becomes fuel for the fire. This was given to Angel near the beginning of Reigns by Spectre to make her evil, which A, explains why the effect isn't quite so in line with the rest of our Trickstars, and B, is quite the plot point. I mean, look, Spectre, if you have a thing for hypnosis, you're on the internet, you can just find that stuff. You don't have to go through the trouble of printing a whole new card over it, my god. Trickstar Korobane is a level 5 monster with 2000 attack and 1000 defense, and if you control no monsters, or all monsters you control are Trickstar monsters, you can special summon this card from your hand. During the damage step, when your Trickstar monster battles an opponent's monster as a quick effect, you can send this card from your hand to the grave, and that monster gains attack equal to its original attack until the end of the turn. But you can only use one effect of this card per turn, and only once per turn. Historically, one of the Trickstar's problems is that they aren't really able to get over decently sized monsters. Korobane helps with this in two ways, either by being a big body on board, or as a battle trick, essentially taking that Trickstar's original attack and slapping a 2x multiplier on it. Even Lycoris shoots up to a staggering 3200 without any other buffs, and because of Trickstar's reputation of being easy to out in battle, the opponent will never see it coming, making this the Korobane of your opponent's existence. Alright, that does it for the main deck. Now let's take a gander at the extra deck offerings. Trickstar Band Dramatis is a level 6 fusion monster with 2000 attack and 1000 defense, requiring 2 Trickstar monsters as material. Your Trickstar Link monsters that point to this card gain 1000 attack, and if this card is fusion summoned, you can add a Trickstar card from your deck to your hand with a different name from the cards that you control and that are in your grave. And if effect damage is inflicted, you can target a face-up monster on the field and change its attack to 0 permanently. Thankfully, that only triggers once per turn, but it's frequent enough where, if they need to deal with a big monster, they're gonna have access to it. I also like how, despite this being one of our newer additions, it still wants you to play like you're under pre-revision Master Rule 4 to fit with all of our previous cards. And it's even another searcher to boot, though only for cards you haven't seen yet. The question is, will the card pool be big enough to accommodate something like this? And if you look at how much time is left in the video, you might have found out that the answer is a little bit of a yes. Sorry, had to get a little dramatis about it. Trickstar Band Sweet Guitar is a level 7 fusion monster with 2200 attack and 1200 defense, requiring a Trickstar Link monster and any other Trickstar monster as material. Effect damage to your opponent by your Trickstar Link monsters linked to this card is doubled, and if your opponent takes damage from a Trickstar monster's effect, this card gains attack equal to the damage that they took. And once per turn during the end phase, if this card attacked this turn, the attack gained from its previous effect returns to 0, then you can add a Trickstar monster from your grave to your hand. And considering you have a fusion monster that needs fusion material, you should have a couple of targets in grave for it. Once again, this thrives when at a link point, giving a big bump to your link monster's Burning Ballad. And it even causes a feedback loop, giving Sweet Guitar a battle buff, and while it doesn't last forever, it does last long enough to make an attack. And even after you lose that boost, there's still that recursion. It's a pretty radical card, and while links are the big focus here, we've got some support that'll make these even better than before. My only question now is, how did they know that the guitar was sweet? Did they eat the guitar? They really shouldn't have done that. Trickstar Bloom is a Link 1 monster with 100 attack, requiring any level 2 or lower Trickstar monster as material. If this card is Link summoned, you can make your opponent draw a card, great for adding more damage off of Lycoris. If a face-up Trickstar monster this card points to is destroyed by a battle or card effect, you can inflict 200 damage to your opponent for each card in their hand. Ah yeah, that forced draw would help with that too, huh? This seems like a pretty easy effect for your opponent to avoid, just, attack the Bloom first. So you're on the hook for finding ways to trigger that effect, and spoilers, we do not have a lot of destruction effects in Engine. Still, the most important part is that it's a Link 1 that Nightshade can fold into, triggering its resummon effect to give you 2 material that you can work with to try and spell your opponent's Bloom. Trickstar Kolchika is a Link 1 monster with 200 attack, requiring any non-Link Trickstar monster as material. When any number of monsters are destroyed by battle involving your Trickstar monster while this card is in your grave, you can banish this card, then target one of those destroyed monsters and inflict damage to your opponent equal to its attack. Now, that effect may seem ludicrous at first glance. You won't be winning very many battles with Trickstars, but it checks to see if a monster was destroyed in a battle involving your Trickstar monster. So if yours gets destroyed, you can retaliate with a little bit of burn, choosing your destroyed Trickstar as the target. Though it's not unheard of that you get big enough to win a battle, just look at Sweet Guitar, so sometimes Kolchika can be a bit of a flame wingman for when you unexpectedly go on the offensive. And it probably makes for a better Link 1 to climb up with since it's actually got a grave effect to complement that line of play. And from this point, I'm supposed to make a joke, and the only thing that I've got is that her name is Kolchika, but I've already done my FNAF references in the Frightfur video, and that is a dark place that I will not be returning to. Trickstar Black Cat Bat is a Link 2 monster with 2000 attack, requiring 2 Trickstar monsters as material. Each time any number of monsters this card points to is destroyed by a battle or card effect and sent to the grave, burn your opponent for 200 damage. And each time your opponent takes damage by a Trickstar monster's effect, face-up monsters they control lose 200 attack for each monster this card points to until the end of the turn. And that's not once per turn. So with you being able to hit a 400 debuff per trigger, this can get out of hand very quickly. If you can get a Lycoris on board, you can easily keep your opponent's monsters on lock, especially if they have to search a lot to get their game plan started. I mean, just for their draw 4 turn, their board is losing 400 attack per monster, if we're fully loaded, and while they can sequence things in a way that summons their monsters after these debuffs occur, you're still making things very difficult for your opponent to operate through, which is the kind of situation you want to be in as the burn player. For a control playstyle, you always want to be limiting your opponent's options, funneling them towards your ultimate game plan and keeping them on shaky footing. Unlike yourself, since Black Cat Bats always land on their feet. Trickstar Crimson Heart is a Link 2 monster with 2000 attack, requiring 2 Trickstar monsters as material. Each time any number of Trickstar monsters are normal or special summoned to a zone this card points to, you gain 200 life points? Wow, that's I'm gonna have to take a second to process that. Anyway, you can discard a Trickstar card to make both players draw a card, but if your life points are at least 2,000 higher than your opponent's when this effect is activated, you draw 2 cards instead. The primary idea is to dig through your deck while triggering Lycoris more, and if you burn them enough, you can turn this into an even effect instead of giving your opponent a +1. But it doesn't really help with the primary game plan of the deck, so it's a neat tech pick, but not much else. So it may be best to keep our schedules open, since Crimson Hearts looks a little booked at the moment. Those handcuffs look like they're gonna get a lot of usage, am I right, everyone? That's because her stage act is actually an escape artist, so, you know, go check out her show. I'm sure it's really good. Trickstar Divaritas is a Link 2 monster with 1800 attack, requiring 2 level 3 or lower Trickstar monsters as material, and you can only control 1 copy of this card. If this card is special summoned, you can inflict 200 damage to your opponent, and if your opponent normal or special summons any number of monsters, inflict 200 damage to them. Oh wow, that's a bonkers one. It pairs very well with Black Cat Bat, but in general, it does put a ceiling on how much your opponent can commit to the board. It's not much on the surface, but combine it with all the other sources of burn that we have, and it gets a lot scarier. I think we just found another of the Tax Dragon subordinates, Head of Entertainment and Venue Collections. No wonder concessions are so expensive nowadays. Trickstar Holly Angel is a Link 2 monster with 2000 attack, requiring 2 Trickstar monsters as material. Each time any number of Trickstar monsters are normal or special summoned to any zone this card points to, burn your opponent for 200 damage. Trickstar monsters this card points to cannot be destroyed by battle or card effects, and if your opponent takes damage by a Trickstar monster's effect, this card gains attack equal to the damage they took until the end of the turn. This makes for a prime monster to keep in the extra monster zone. You get to keep 2 monsters safe, and it gets bigger the more damage you do that turn. Sweet Guitar is similar, though it gets to keep its attack until it actually attacks. Any gains you make on your opponent's turn with this are purely defensive. Aim to make this first, then build out from there, setting up your band with all the best burners on the market, which will ensure that Holly Angel is pretty jolly. Trickstar Noble Angel is a Link 2 monster with 2000 attack, requiring 2 Trickstar monsters as material. If this card is Link summoned, you can add a Blue Tears card from your deck to your hand up. Oh great, we've got to cover those too, huh? If you have a fusion monster in your graveyard, you can target a Trickstar monster in your grave and special summon it, and if effect damage is inflicted, you can target a face-up card on the field and destroy it. Wow, honest to goodness removal, can you believe it? This is another new card, and as you can see, an update to Blue Angel's ace monster, Holly Angel. It gets you a search, revives a monster once you invest in the fusion side of your deck, and can hit your opponent with spot removal. And while it has the downward arrows, thankfully none of its effects rely on those, so don't feel like you have to avoid putting this in the main monster zone. This is a big plus for the theme, probably because they swapped out Holly's whip mace with one filled with poison. It's even got the kind that turns into a skull shape when you shake the bottle. That's how you know it's the good stuff. Trickstar Delphindium is a Link 3 monster with 2200 attack, requiring 2 or more Trickstar monsters as material. When this card declares an attack while pointing to a Trickstar monster, you can target your banished Trickstar cards up to the number of Link monsters your opponent controls and add them to the hand. And if you do, this card gains 1000 attack for each card added until the end of this turn. Even just getting back one card puts this at an impressive 3200. But once again, we're running into the issue of playing a card that's dependent on our opponent playing Link monsters, which isn't a guarantee at this stage of the game. Heck, you can't even count on having any banished Trickstars. You'll have to look outside the engine for a way to handle that yourself. But at the very least, it's still a monster you can go into if the situation calls for it, both if your opponent has links and has a knack for banishing your cards. But if Delphindium wants to be a fiend so bad, we can just let him be that, right? There's not a rule that all Trickstars have to be fairies, right? Can someone check the guidebook? Trickstar Foxglove Witch is a Link 3 monster with 2200 attack, requiring 2 or more fairy monsters as material. If this card is special summoned, you can burn your opponent for 200 damage for each card they control. And if this Link summoned card is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can special summon a Link 2 or lower Trickstar monster from your extra deck, then burn your opponent for 200 damage for each card they control. So you get to secret barrel your opponent when it enters the field and when it leaves. It honestly feels like a great summon target off of Redode, cause this triggers off of any kind of special summon, not specifically Link summoning. Though the leaving the field part won't work because that one has to be linked. It's a nice option to help chip away at your opponent's life points, and if you have to end on this, at least you can float into another Link, showing your opponent that the Fox gloves are off. Trickstar Bella Madonna is a Link 4 monster with 2800 attack, requiring 2 or more Trickstar monsters as material. While this Link summoned card points to no monsters, it's unaffected by other cards' activated effects. And also if this card points to no monsters, you can burn your opponent for 200 damage for each Trickstar monster in your grave with a different name. Ooh, talk about your finishers! It's a towers that can burn your opponent for a lot of damage before even moving in for the kill. And you have to get rid of this as soon as possible if you can, because otherwise this is just going to run away with the game. Thankfully, since it has less than 3000 attack, being a towers isn't so bad, especially a towers that can actually have its effect turned off since it has those upward pointing arrows. But if your deck isn't outfitted to deal with a big monster, you're cooked, because this card will make short work of those life points, no matter if it has to be by battle or card effect. But, you know, I'm starting to think that they're taking this assignment a bit too seriously. We've seen some quirky weapons up to this point that's like stage equipment or accessories. There was even that little poison bottle that we all know is actually just a bunch of Gatorade. Bella Madonna straight up just has a battle axe. Should we just call HR? Alright, that covers the extra deck, now it's time for the spells and traps. Angel of Blue Tears is a normal spell card that targets a face-up monster on the field. Its controller's opponent takes damage equal to the number of cards in their hand times 200, then negate that target's effect until the end of the turn. If effect damage is inflicted, except during the damage step, you can banish this card from your grave to set a normal trap card directly from your hand or deck. And if the card's set was from the hand, it can be activated this turn. But you can only use one effect of this card per turn, and only once per turn. So you can negate one of your own monsters to burn your opponent, or burn yourself to negate an opponent's monster. Either way, Noble Angel's destruction effect will trigger from this, because it doesn't care who got burned, just that effect damage was inflicted. and it certainly doesn't help that this card is searchable off of Noble Angel. It also incentivizes you to play as many normal trap cards as you can to maximize the graveyard effect, giving you access to powerful cards sooner than you otherwise would. But I don't want to see any of you complaining about all this. You're not hard done by because it only works on normal trap cards. Labyrinth are doing just fine. Trickstar Festival is a normal spell card that special summons 2 Trickstar tokens, which are level 1 Light Fairy monsters with 0 attack and defense, but you cannot normal or special summon any monsters the turn you activate this card, except Trickstar monsters. And if any number of Trickstar monsters that were special summoned from the extra deck would be destroyed by battle or card effect, you can banish this card from your grave instead. This may as well read Special Summon a Trickstar Link monster, since so many of our best options are Link 2. As long as we're on a pure version of the deck, this is fantastic, but this sadly locks out any of our extra deck flex slots. Still, we've got a free Holly Angel on hand to protect our monsters before we get our combo started, which Festival itself protects. Or we can summon a Noble Angel for a blue Tears search. Either way, you're gonna have a blast no matter who headlines the show. But honestly, yeah, the turnout seems a little low. Now, if this was a Hippo Carnival, we'd be filling up these monster zones really quick. Trickstar Fusion is a normal spell card that fusion summons a Trickstar Fusion monster from your extra deck, using monsters from your hand or field as fusion material. You can banish this card from your grave, then target a Trickstar monster in your grave and add it to your hand, but you can't normal summon, set, or special summon monsters with that name for the rest of the turn. Basically, it's a polymerization that gets you an on-theme monster back. And while it's sadly on a 1-turn delay, at least this card is searchable. The only problem is that we only have 2 targets for it, so there's a chance it may be better to just run regular polymerization with all the support that card's gotten over the years. Guardian Chimera is always a savage option, though I guess without this, they won't be able to perform their pop idol, folk, grunge, synthwave, nightcore genre fusion the Trickstars are obviously known for. Trickstar Bouquet is a quick play spell card that targets a Trickstar monster you control and a face-up monster on the field. Return that Trickstar monster to the hand, and if you do, the other monster gains attack equal to the original attack of the returned monster until the end of the turn. This is one of those cool battle tricks that dodge interaction cards that can let you do some silly nonsense. On the most basic level, you get a big chunk of attack to help battle a monster you otherwise couldn't get over. Other times, you scooch a Candina out of the way of an infinite impermanence to make sure the effect resolves. If you don't have Lycoris, that is. But my favorite is, because this is an effect that modifies attack and defense values, you can use this in the middle of the damage step to get your Trickstar off the field while still using up that opponent's monster's attack. And if you don't have another monster to gain that attack value, that's no problem. You can actually use this to boost any monster on the board. But, as is the issue with a lot of these cards, its uses are situational at best and ineffective at worst. Your combined attack may still not be enough, or attack isn't what's needed to solve a problem in the first place. That would mean you're stuck with a bunch of flowers, but very little powers. Trickstar Magical Laurel is an equipped spell card that you can activate by targeting a Trickstar monster in your grave. Special summon it and equip it with this card, and when this card leaves the field, destroy that monster. And once per turn, if the equipped monster inflicts battle or effect damage to your opponent, you can special summon a Trickstar monster from your hand. So it's a premature burial that can get Trickstars out of your hand, though how easy you can pull that off will depend on the monster that you summon back and accessorize with it. Lycoris, basically guaranteed. Black Catbat, bit less so. Just be sure to stay focused when using this so you can get the best value so it works for you. Wouldn't want to be resting on those laurels now, would ya? Trickstar Light Arena is a field spell card that, if you link summon a Trickstar monster, you can target a Trickstar monster in your grave that was used as material and special summon it in defense position, but negate its effects. And once per turn, you can target a set card in your opponent's spell and trap zone, and while this card is in the field zone, that set card cannot be activated until the end phase, at which point your opponent has to activate it or return it to their hand. This is the first of many field spells that we have, and this one is focused on helping you link climb, giving you more material to get up that ladder. Delphinium will be a breeze to make here, and Bella Madonna is one step closer. It also provides some insulation against your opponent's back row by locking one of them off. It goes back to the hand during the end phase, which is pretty annoying. They'll still be able to use it later, but keep an eye out, we'll get that fixed up soon enough. If anything, you may want to replace it with another field spell once you've gotten your extension. Though, I mean, there are so many fans here, it'd be a shame to leave them hanging like that. Maybe we can do one more song. Trickstar Light Stage is a field spell card that, when activated, adds a Trickstar monster from your deck to your hand. And once per turn, much like Trickstar Light Arena, you can target a set card in your opponent's spell and trap zone, and while this card is in the field zone, that set card cannot be activated until the end phase, and your opponent must activate it during that end phase, or else send it to the graveyard, a bit more impactful than our past venue. And each time a Trickstar monster you control inflicts effect damage to your opponent, inflict 200 damage to him. This is basically our bread and butter field spell, and we should aim to have this active as long as possible, as often as we can. Because this can search Candina, and Candina can search this, and both of them can search any Trickstar monster, having one basically means having both, plus whatever your follow-up search is, giving you a frankly absurd amount of flexibility and consistency. But it's more than just the field spell that searches the Link 1, it also insulates your plays against back row by forcing that back row lockdown, being a better version than Light Arena. And if that wasn't enough, Light Stage also makes our win condition even better. Because most of our Trickstars deal damage in increments of 200, Light Stage effectively doubles the impact of each instance of burn. Though, quick note here, thankfully it's not as bonkers when combined with Lycoris as you might think. It is true that for every time a card is added to your opponent's hand while they're under Lycoris, they are taking 400 points of burn damage. But if they draw, or are forced to draw, multiple cards, Lycoris' damage is done as one big chunk after it checks the amount of cards that were added from the deck to the hand. We'll have a better example of how this is used later, but for now, let's presume that Trickstar player hits you with a Hand of Destruction. This draws you 2 cards, dealing you 200 damage for each, which means you're taking 400. Then Light Stage comes in and adds in 200 damage, so that's 600 total, as opposed to it just doubling the amount of damage that Lycoris does. It's not going to be 800, though that is a small comfort. This card was so good at what it did that it was actually limited in 2019, and has only been restored to a full 3 copies for a little over a year, hitting the unlimited list in October of 2022. But despite the added space, I'm not quite sure that's so good for the band's bottom line. I figured if they were sold out, they'd be able to sell tickets at a higher price for limited seating. Trickstar Live Stage is a field spell card that, when activated, lets you add a Trickstar monster from your grave to your hand. If you control a Trickstar Link monster, you can special summon a Trickstar token, much like the ones we make off of Festival, and if your opponent controls a card in their spell and trap zone, you can special one of those tokens. But if you use either of those token-making effects, you can't special summon monsters that turn except Trickstar monsters, even if this card leaves the field. I'm starting to think this deck doesn't really get along with back row cards. This is the 3rd out of 3 field spells that punishes your opponent for having back row. Now, since this card makes you tokens for having a Link monster, this may seem like it's trying to help you with Link climbing, and sure, it can, but remember, Sweet Guitar is a fusion monster that needs a Trickstar Link monster as one of its material, so Light Stage is basically setting you up for your next fusion by getting you an extra regular Trickstar monster to go along with that Link. Or, yeah, we can just keep linking up as far as we want to go into more Trickstars. Heck, the Trickstar we get back from the grave can be linked off, and then we make that token alongside it to get a link too. And who knows, maybe your opponent set a bluff so you can make another token for a Sweet Link 3. And if you grabbed back Lilybell, you didn't even have to use your normal summon for that one, so that could get you up to Bella Madonna. It's no Light Stage, but if you're running low on resources and need a quick bump, this stage is here to help make sure your play sequences are live. Maiden of Blue Tears is a normal trap card, and if your opponent special summons any number of monsters and you control a Link monster, target one of those summoned monsters and destroy it, and if you do, inflict damage to your opponent equal to half its original attack. And if effect damage is inflicted while this card is in your grave, you can banish this card, then target a normal spell card that's in your grave or banishment and set it, but it cannot be activated this turn, and you can only use one effect of this card per turn, and only once per turn. This makes for a great search off of Noble Blue Angel when going first, giving you a way to halt an opponent's setup while adding a bit more burn damage to your proceedings. Recycling your spell is also pretty nice, though because it only hits normal spells, we can't get back our killer field spells. It also comes with a funny inversion of Angel of Blue Tear's effect, where it had a way to activate normal trap cards the turn they're set, but normal spells, which normally wouldn't have that problem, get locked no matter what, so you can't just bring back a triple tactics thrust and get immediate value from it. Because of this, you're encouraged to trigger that effect during your opponent's turn, preferably as late as possible so your opponent has as little time to interact with it as possible, and then once it rolls around to main phase 1, you can activate it at your discretion. So either your opponent will spend some resources getting rid of it, in which case they spent their own value to get rid of a free card, which is pretty cool, or they don't, and you're able to resolve your Haymaker. It'll certainly bring a blue tear to your opponent's eyes. Trickstar Diffusion is a normal trap card, and when you activate it on the field, you can choose one of two effects. Either you fusion summon a Trickstar Fusion monster from your extra deck by banishing the materials from your grave, or immediately after this effect resolves, you link summon a Trickstar monster. You can also banish this card from your grave, then target a Trickstar monster that you control, and this turn, your opponent's monsters cannot target monsters for attacks except the targeted monster while it's face up on the field. Hey, now that's a fusion effect I can get behind. We're already using up a lot of material to make our link monsters, now we can drop a fusion out of nowhere using no material at all. And because of Hoodie's own effect, we've basically got access to this whenever we want. But don't forget about the quick link effect either. You never know when you'll need to make a Bella Madonna in the face of a big board wipe to help keep your board presence up. And speaking of which, that grave effect also works wonders with Bella Madonna as well. They'll be unaffected by activated effects, but this is going to affect our opponent, which means no matter how many other Trickstars we have, the only choice they can make for an attack is Bella Madonna. And she's not the only one, it pairs nicely with all of our bigger Trickstars, especially the ones that gain attack the more effect damage you do. This is a massive upgrade over regular Trickstar Fusion. It turns out that using material from the grave was the diffusion difference. Trickstar Reincarnation is a normal trap card that banishes your opponent's entire hand, and if you do, they draw the same number of cards. You can also banish this card from your grave, then target a Trickstar monster in your grave and special summon it. Now, this card contributed a lot to Trickstar's reputation as being chronically annoying. You could end up drawing a god hand only to lose out on all of it because your opponent flipped the reincarnation during the draw phase. And while the target of the harassment would still have the same number of cards in hand, it's kind of insidious how the math works against the person who just got wheeled. Think about it like this. If you have a 40 card deck and you open a 5 card hand, you're looking at 1/8 of your deck. Now let's say that your deck building is so good that only 1 out of those 8 hands isn't going to be very playable. This means a majority of the time you'll be drawing into a good hand, but if you have to wheel that, you could also end up with a good hand, but it also comes with the chance of opening up that really bad hand that you wouldn't have otherwise. And if you think about it in reverse, the person using Trickstar Reincarnation only has a 1 in 8 chance of resolving it at the worst possible time. But that's all high concept math stuff. There's also a more concrete reason why this card is annoying to deal with, because any Trickstar you thought you were rid of can just come back at the blink of an eye. They can flip the reincarnation during your draw phase, dealing you 1200 damage off the 6 cards you just drew. Then if you destroy the Lycoris, then go for your big search, they can chain the reincarnation to it at a later chain link, Lycoris will be on the field, and there you go, you're out to even more life points. And if that wasn't enough, we still haven't covered the worst thing this card is capable of. Everyone, I introduced to you the Trickstar Droll Hand Rip. Let's say you try to resolve a reinforcement of the army, a bonfire, heck, even a Snake Eye Ash to keep things meta. If you're up against a Trickstar opponent, well, you better be wary, because once that search resolves, they can activate Reincarnation to get the hand loop going, which not only gets rid of the card that you tried to search out to improve your hand, because Droll Lockbird doesn't need to respond directly to the search, it just needs to be in that activation window, they can activate Droll at an even later chain link, and so, when it resolves backwards, Droll keeps both players from adding cards from their main deck to the hand, even by drawing, and then Reincarnation will resolve as much as it can, banishing the whole hand, and then drawing the victim nothing! And all the cards involved in that? Yeah, those are still legal to play today. And it's not like it eats into the deck space of the theme. They're already running these cards anyway. So some percentage of times against Trickstars, they're just gonna have a way to get rid of all of your in-hand cards, and there's not much you can do about it outside of an Ash Blossom against the Reincarnation. And then using an Ash Blossom against that feels pretty bad if you're just stopping yourself from drawing cards, but then you have to be wary about using the Ash Blossom against other effects in case they have the hand rip and you need to protect yourself. Honestly, I'm super not looking forward to it. Just when you think you don't have to worry about some horrid nonsense, the devs dig it up and drag it around for a whole nother format. I'm very mad, but I do respect the flavor accuracy. Good job reflecting the reincarnation in the actual metagame. Alright, so that's all of the Trickstar cards, but what do we do with them? Shrimple. We wall up, set up, and burn things down. Get your best Trickstars on board to force your opponent to take passive damage, use back row to stifle your opponent, and link as necessary to make your board even safer before striking the last chord. So what can we play to help them out? Well, I mean, I could sit here all day and rattle off all the outrageous floodgates that are available to play. Rivalry goes in, and there can be only one R at one, but that's still a trio of cards that helps to gum up boards. Even under Teekboo, a single Trickstar with enough additional trap card protection can do wonders. We even have a special monster we can make use of that does its best Secret Village of the Spellcaster's impression. Sky Scourge Invisil. Tribute summon it with any of your light fairies, and there goes all spell card effects. Now, that does hurt you too, so be careful when trying to combine this with your field spell, but if it becomes a problem, you can just link it off or something. Also, I feel compelled to remind everyone that, as a fairy deck, we can summon Archlord Christia to shut off special summons. I would say only do this if you want to lose friends, but let's face it, you're playing Trickstars. Your opponent's enjoyment of the game was the last thing on your mind during deck building. But if you want to try and pass yourself off as a decent human being, you can say no in a more direct way. Counter traps like Solemn Judgment and Strike can be devastating one-card responses to your opponent's choke points, and with the abundance of fairy monsters in your deck, Herald of the Orange Light is one of the best hand traps you could be playing. It's kind of like a store-brand Psy-Frame Gear Gamma if you think about it. We just talked about this during our big Sanctuary in the Sky videos, but Melodious fits in with our light fairy motif, and honestly, having them throw down some guest tracks for us would be wild. We get a free pendulum scale to dump monsters out of our hand, lots of material to work with, and a fusion that does wonders when it comes to rendering our opponent's field inert. You can also lean on Chopina to get your Trickstars out of your grave and into your hand, all off of a very small investment. Sometimes, the key to beating up your opponent is by drawing them to death. Once you get Lycoris on board, feel free to let loose with any number of card and hand destructions, make your opponent regret playing Maxion Master Duel by summoning as much as humanly possible, heck, play the Silent Magician cards that make both players draw a whole bunch for all I care. As long as you can keep hitting them for that sweet, sweet effect damage every time they draw, it'll be over soon enough. Alternatively, we can play cards like Pot of Prosperity to help dig us deeper towards our Drollin Lockbird, while playing Trap Trick to set Reincarnation from our deck, giving us the maximum opportunity to take away all of our opponent's in-hand resources. And when going second, maybe play a healthy helping of Lightning Storms and other mass board wipe answers to deal with established setups. As with every deck that includes fusions, I would recommend giving Frightful Patchwork a try. You get a free polymerization and a monster to use with it, and Guardian Chimera never stopped being a good card. If you need to proactively deal with a board, there aren't a lot of better ways to do it, and it even digs you deeper into your deck. Also, did you know that Guardian Chimera actually gets past a special summoned Melodious Aria? Just saying. As for a silly tech pick, Dark Room of Nightmare is here to stay, baby! It's like having another Trickstar Light stage on your board, but it does even more damage, and because it's a continuous spell card, you can play more than one, and the damage stacks. Imagine getting 3 of these on board and doming your opponent for 1,000 plus damage every time you trip on a Trickstar effect. You'll never hear that person disrespect DM era cards ever again. Alright, that does it for the Trickstar cards, but how do they stack up against the Nova scale? Novelty. While it's more novel than getting your knuckles dusted with combat damage, burn is not without its own history. However, it's almost always been in the form of FTKs that look to close out the game on the spot, rather than actually play the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Trickstars, for all their tools, don't do this. Much of the burn is predicated on your opponent taking certain actions, which means that, despite our best efforts, does require your opponent to actually participate, at least in engine. We'll get into that nonsense soon enough. Now, I can't say that burn but balanced is a big innovation, but I've got to give credit where credit is due. Trickstars get a 3 in novelty. Objectivity. It's already frustrating enough to see our opponent orchestrate game states where you're forced to twiddle your thumbs and watch your life slowly drain away. I already get enough of that experience during any given Runic Pure matchup. So despite being more fair, this doesn't stop the burn players from playing to their natural strengths. And that all culminates in the droll hand rip. The spellcaster that locks both players out of the main deck is already a pain in the booty hole that people are clamoring to see removed right now. But now it's part of a not so difficult to assemble combo that leaves the victim with an Infernity Dex hand. Even if this only gets off the ground, say 30% of the time, that's one game out of a best of 3 that you're just losing through no fault of your own. Which is especially frustrating since that's not the deck's main game plan. And with the introduction of a card that literally lets you see all of the opponent's hidden information, the gloves are off in this section. It's no FTK, but it's certainly no Saint either. So Trickstars get a 2 in objectivity. Versatility. Back in the olden days, Trickstars actually saw splashes in a number of decks looking to get 2 free material onto the board. You know how I brought up that Light Stage and Candina can search each other? Well, if the second search grabs Lilybell that freely special summons itself, those 2 monsters made a Nightmare, which could then turn into Nightmare Mermaid, and congratulations, you just got access to full Orcus power near the height of its power. But today? You can sneeze and get like 3 material to use for anything that you want. While there's a cavalcade of fairy support out there that we might be able to pull from, very few lines are out there that really fit with our playstyle. And while Trickstar Aqua Angel technically works with any Link deck, ones outside of Trickstar and Marincess are gonna have to find a way to weave it into their combos without being too disruptive. So Trickstars get a 2 in versatility. Awesomeness. So I'm not going to pretend that decks like Trickstar have some kind of appeal. I get it. You've sussed out a way to play around the normal patterns of the game, winning your match by making sure your opponent participated in it as little as possible. It's kind of cool to feel like a mastermind. And let's not forget that when the shields are down, Trickstars are no stranger to the mosh pit, and I think the fusion inclusions have done a lot towards incentivizing a more active style of play, so I can't really fault the deck too much. Trickstars get a 4 in awesomeness, which means they get a total of 11 out of 20 on the Nova scale. And that's all I have to say about Trickstars. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not looking forward to seeing this in contention when they get released. You know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this playstyle is too antiquated even with the new support. Maybe not everyone will find a way to jam Aqua Angel into their deck to scope out the competition. Or maybe we've just found ourselves in a new, heinous world where duelists struggle to put down 8,000 points of good, honest battle damage before these newfangled game pieces beat us to it. You know, just ignore the fact that we now have an archetype that can punch through 3 Pot of Prosperities. It's the effect damage that's the problem! But now, I want to hear what you all have to say. Are Trickstars about to make a big comeback, or do they no longer have their old star power? And which one's your favorite? Honestly, I give it a lot of guff, but Lycoris is pretty cute, and it has a gaze that tells you that you're about to meet the business end of that sword. Let me know what your favorite is down below, and if you haven't already, please be sure to like the video if you liked it, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and share this video with somebody you know who loves Yu-Gi-Oh! It really does a lot to help me out. Today's episode is brought to you by my lovely patrons, as well as the lovely people over at Dragon Shield. Get the sleeves as strong as dragon scales and save 5% on your order by using the coupon code GoldenNova at checkout. Today's episode was also brought to you by my lovely patrons, including this month's illustrious Quasar Commanders, the Critic of Innocence and Upstairs Media, Nebula Navigators, 3rd Dynasty, Ada Basilisk, Adam Zajdel, Owexatoa Hime, Anansi Dragon, Kane Senpai, Chibi Gohan, Christopher Fuss, Clockswork, Comrade Copperbottom, Emony-chan, Eric, Frankie, Garland Chaos, Green Knight, Gloomba331, Great Big Pillock, Groog, Hairbear, Harry the Ominous Benefactor, Howling Zangetsu, Iron Zero, Iskander711, Carp, Mana Charge, Marion James E. Picata, Megacombi, Millennia Asta, Muzuki Clark, Nathan Vig, Natiel Lee Alexander, Orozco 09096, Panther J, Rebel King Lucifer, Red Eyes Jackalow, RJ the Jank Monarch, Sammy Haim, Scott48, Serenity Towns, Skybuster Leo, That One Dumbass, Thievery Coast and the Wizard Moose, Cosmic Crusaders Alpha Sly, Almento 5010, A Random Pup, Ariel Kersey, Beelzephyr, Baron Von Titty Sprinkles, Beluga Master, Bernag, Blitzwolf, Blue Gem, Borger with a Shotgun, Chaz Ghost, Childish Lamar, Dr. Reaper R.I.P., Drachenwald, Eki Bullock, Eva Padilla, Fabrizio Orpianesi, Hike Boyagian, Herbal D, Ignis Heath the True Draco Slayer, Jester Designs, Kale the Dragon, Kevon Public, Lemon Yu-Gi-Oh!, Lobomaru02, Manga Pages, Matt Simmons, Mick Spoofy, Michael Shimabukuro, Nitromo, Obsidian, Ramen Resurrect-chan, Shizuka Nijimura, Sophie, apparently, Stephen Williamson, Taylor Seymour, Terror Top to 3, Tiger X2476, The Pokemon 52, The Legendary Raven, and Zaldreka, as well as all the lovely Starlight Explorers you see on screen now. If you'd like to help me in my journey to cover all of Yu-Gi-Oh's archetypes, get my videos early, be a part of these credits and other awesome perks, it would mean the world to me if you checked out the link to my Patreon in the description or consider joining as a YouTube member. And if you'd like to see what another control strategy with unorthodox tactics has to offer, check out this video where I cover the first wave of runic support. I think we were still calling it Mysterunes at the time. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. This is an odd one, to be sure. The primary use is to dig through your deck while triggering Lycoris's Licorice. You can banish this card from your hand instead. Hand? Huh? No. What? As long as we're on a pure version of the deck, this card is fantastic, but does sadly burp you in the middle of trying to do a take right now because my body is a cavalcade of horrors. They are, after all, the Hatsune Miku of Yu-Gi-Oh! Don't put that in. That's I don't know what I'm...